Now we will start our new debate, medical devices, how to quickly access innovations. Isabelle Adnaud, Lucille Blaise, David Comartin, Stéphane Regnault, and Kirstine Wagner. Would you please come up to the round table here, and the debates will be led by Laurence COMTE-ARASSUS. Good morning, everyone. We're very happy to be with you today for a topic that we are all very attached to around the table. For medical devices, how can we quickly access innovations? This topic, we touched upon it actually yesterday. Let me give you some context. In the framework of these innovations, when you're in the medical device industry, where are we today? Well, our ministers, Gérald Darmanin, Bruno Le Maire, and Agnès Buzyn, sent a letter where they recalled all of this in view of the renegotiation of the framework agreement on medical devices. They recalled their attachment to continuing what we call conventional negotiations in France. There are a certain number of industry representatives in the room, and I think we have some doubts concerning this point. There are three main action principles that should guide this in the framework of these negotiations. Access to treatment, to the most innovative treatments. This is our topic today. The control and efficiency of healthcare products and the attractiveness of territories. Stéphane, would you like to start? These 3 points, do you think these 3 points are in line with the topic today? Which is how to rapidly access these innovations? Well, yes, these 3 points are, yes, in line with a rapid access to innovations. But we must observe that one of the points is cannibalizing the others, which is controlling expenditures. And we can understand this. The committee to assess healthcare products is just a committee or a council, an advisory body, but it also has to pay. It plays a very important role, and that's a euphemism. And the main objective is to control healthcare expenses. And that's a noble objective, and we cannot oppose that objective. But this objective still tends to cannibalize the others. Now, let me recall the context. These innovations are managed by assessments on the one hand, medical assessments and economic assessments by 2 different bodies, and this represents about 1/3 of the medical device innovations. The other 2/3 arrive with the GHS in what we call the homogeneous treatment groups, and they arrive through an evaluation or an assessment of what we call of the acts. So 1/3 is managed by the CPS, and 2/3 are managed by other committees or bodies. Now, at the level of the CEPS in France, and my colleague, I would like to thank her because she's here with us. I'd like to thank them for their excellent job, not in terms of to facilitate the assessments, but in terms of transparency and the comprehension of the assessment mechanism. So I think that we've really made progress, and the assessment lead times have been shortened, and things are going quite well. This is what we said yesterday on medication. There's the economic aspect, and here, this can last a long time. And we can really see that there's fear of innovations, because innovations may lead to excessive expenditures. So this fear seems to block progress. Innovation within the GHSs, we talk a lot about it in France, but we don't see much arriving. And in recent weeks, we've heard that there will be an evolution towards the end of H2As. So the budget will be managed by the establishments themselves. This could give some breathing room and some possibility to act in the field to embrace these new innovations. We think that things will be changing by the end of 2020. I know that the KDIMS was reviewing all of the product lists before the end of 2020, and I wish you a lot of courage in this huge task. Well, we'll hear more about that. So, again, I think the situation is quite blocked in France. Well, we are used to being together at the SNITEM. I think sometimes they consider us as a financial adjustment variable. Well, in our companies, when we try to look for savings, we always squeeze the suppliers, and I think the same thing is happening in the medical sector. Now, investing for innovation, I think this speaks to you. I hope we're not only considered as suppliers. We can come back to this. Investing for innovating, you can tell us what this means for you. I think you can also tell us about clinical studies. I think it's very important that you recall that you were the first company to have the second version of the innovation, what we call the innovation fee. Can you tell us a little about what this means for you, innovating? Well, innovation is crucial for us because we are a startup that represents 80% of applied research in France. To continue to raise capital, obviously you have to make money to attract investors. There are a few investors here. I haven't met them all, but this is what they're asking. If you get the CE marking, so 50 million, you need 50 million. But he'd be happy for much less. So yes, if we get the CE marking, it's crucial for us. And it's important to choose the markets that will be able to show to our investors that we're capable of setting up a good business. So we chose 3 markets for Terra-Client: Germany, the US, and France. In Germany today, and I would like to thank again Adricuteur, it's our leading market. We have 50% of our systems in Germany. We have 250 reimbursed treatments for thyroid and 25% coverage with individual insurance contracts. It's really going very well, both with the GDA and the insurance companies. And we've had very intelligent discussions with them in the past 4 years. In the US, we started the same approach. And I think it was Jean-Patrick Salle, the predecessor of your predecessor. And we were among the first discussions before the circular letter was even written. And so that was complicated. And there was a lot of kindness, a lot of friendliness. They received us, they coached us, and we filed the application, the request for DGOS and the HAS for breast fibradenome. And you can tell us what you've done to improve this, but we lost about 4 months because we had to have an agreement from the Learned Society, which was the Gynecologist Obstetricians Association. But our system is a surgery robot that does not cut the skin, and when you treat a tumor in the thyroid or the breast, obviously surgeons have less to do. So we had a hard time achieving this, but in the end, we did. I think this is the biggest difficulty for us as an innovative company in medical devices, is that we were obliged and we accepted to do a cluster test on 300 patients.
So this randomized trial with the same indications led to a meeting with all of the competent people to make this decision for prospective trials. So if you have a device that's innovative, the comparative arm is very complicated for a trial that actually functions. And to this end, in the U.S., we've already recruited 80% of the patients, whilst in France, and Madame Anneau is perfectly aware of this, we only have 1 patient recruited because the trial is very complicated to set up. You can imagine us, a small company, setting up 12 sites in France. at the same time, because a randomized cluster test requires that it all be done at the same time. So for us as a company, like 80% of startups in France, you have to bear this figure in mind, less than 12 months of cash flow. So in what market will you invest to go back to investors with a real business case that functions? It's critical for us. In France, the cost of the innovation forfait is not free. It's an investment, 1.5 to 2 million euros. And we decided to do this because for us, the French market is a strategic market, and your teams have had a benevolent attitude towards us, and without their help, we never would have succeeded. Nevertheless, and Madame Adanou will tell us everything that was done. The forfait innovation is in France. The specific tool has been simplified, and I think we need to compare what's being done in the West and to the east of us. Today, you have the FDA. They can approve over 510 cases in 3 months. They get 4,000 requests a year. And the FDA announced a month ago what Nicolas Bouzou said yesterday, what we talked about the previous night. The FDA is integrating its regulatory processes, discussions with the reimbursement agencies, the CMS, and all the other big payers in the U.S. So what's happening now is that in the U.S., not only is the procedure more fluid for us, for small companies that don't have lots of resources to work with the regulatory agencies. Well, you have the biggest market in the world that's becoming more simple, that's opening up naturally to all types of innovation in healthcare. And I say, attention, this is a danger because all the money's there. The investment funds are there. Our company would have a capitalization 10 to 20 times higher in the U.S. And if access to market is easier, all companies such as ours working on innovation where 90% of the revenue is abroad, we're all going to move to the U.S. And this is not something that brings a smile to my face, believe me. Those are the stakes, and I know that you're doing your best. Tell us how you're going to help us, please. Madame Adanou, our initial title was How to Quickly Access Innovations. What can you tell us to reassure us that this is possible? Responding to innovation, it's obvious. It's a requirement. It's more than just obvious in the world that's changing as it's changing today, at the speed at which it's changing. If we don't move forward, we're actually taking a step backwards, and all of the members of the Commission don't get up every morning to say, what are we going to do to make it harder for companies so that they can't move forward? Well, that's good news, and I've met every member of the Commission on this topic because it's vital. It's important because, as you said, medical devices have a specificity. They evolve rapidly. 67% of our applications are first registrations. So it comes from technology, comes from aerospatial industry, aeronautics, mechanics, textile industry. There's a convergence and an acceleration in technological innovation, and that mixes all of this together. And since the medical device depends on operators, the health professionals want to move forward also, and they want to improve their medical practice. All of this converges, and this means there's a real acceleration. An acceleration of technology, arrival of new technologies means that those who are in charge of assessing them, the CNEDIMS, by definition also has to evolve at the same pace as the technologies do. Otherwise, there'll be a real problem. We do assess, so we're not playing poker. So at a certain moment, we need to have data, we need to have elements, clear elements, we need proof, but the more we take a risk with a medical device, when there's uncertainty, the more we can play on constants, a constant law. As soon as you change legislation, the regulations, the applications, that takes time. So we want to stay with constant law. With constant law, we can play with the comparator, we can play with the target population, and Mr. Revel talked about this yesterday. We can also use the question of real-life studies. I won't mention any cases or examples, but recently we gave a medical device for pneumology, saying that it was going to improve service at level 4, while at the CE marking it said that there were risks associated. But the counterparty is there was practically no alternative, and these people can't even walk 4 to 5 meters in their house. So at a given moment, you have to accept that there are risks. Innovation is also a mindset, and that gives me the opportunity to thank our president for they're putting us in pole position, our innovation in strategy in our organization, the head of the HES in France. It's a mindset we have to accept to take risks. And it's great when you see what industrial companies are capable of developing. And so for this Forfait Innovation program in France, yes, we have to improve the internal process. And today, it works. It works at the level of the assessment, if you like. We had 3 applications for cardiology. We have some in neurology. We've had applications in cardiology. We've had ACTS. The college gave a positive opinion in December or January, and the study is already underway with the inclusion of patients. So there is an acceleration on our side, too. Of course, we can improve things. We'll see the questions of early access being raised, and all of that is positive. So let's move forward. We have no problem with that. Just a last question for you, Madame Adenau. A few of us feel that there's a race against time, and it's a race against time, as you said, for patients. One of the pitfalls, as David said, that we've all hit are the clinical studies, the clinical trials. I have a personal memory that goes back to a nightmare, one of the worst nightmares for me and my coworkers. What advice could you give to companies in the exchanges with you so that we don't end up in the situation like where you have a clinical trial but no patients available? So I'm not going to make any friends here. Well, it doesn't matter. We're here for that. But firstly, companies must really choose the person that's advising them in terms of clinical trials. If you see, I'm not a methodologist, but clearly things aren't going well. Why is this important? Well, we're going to bring a new methodologist into the Commission, a person who's specialized in low participation studies. So we're having very narrow target populations, and there are some very specific trials. So the advice that I would give is, if you have a prosthetic device for your hand, it will always be a hand device. Some are bionic-based and others are not. So what's the added value? What will it do more? And so the trial, for it to be to really have value, you need to look at quality of life elements that are measurable, of course. On the impact, the organizational impact also, and explanations why we can't do a large or small clinical trial. Give the reasons for which you can't carry out your trial, and then we'll judge it. It's like Nicolas Bouzou said yesterday, you have to have a vision. Yes, we will certainly talk about connected objects, connected devices. A connected device, a defibrillator, can be connected or not, in telemedicine or not, remote control, and the trials will be different to prove the added value of that type of device. That's obvious. that connected device. So, Kirsten Wagner, you have a global vision of the extended Europe that's what we consider old Europe and the emerging countries, two very different Europes. What can you say to us about our discussion, what you've seen in Europe, and what are the specific characteristics, and what strikes you about the ability to go forward more quickly towards innovation in the main countries?
First of all, thanks for inviting me to speak on what matters really after having spent quite some time also in research and development, scouting biomarkers, and that is something which really matters to me. So I would first of all also say that innovation in medical devices is not only related to clinical studies, so there is other topics, new business models and other areas which we of course have to look into this. But talking about clinical studies, and that's the main question here, is where we normally look along the line of clinical pathways. So here we have to work together with competence centers or centers of competence where we really get this advice, maybe, which is also mentioned over here.
I agree with Isabelle.
This is clearly a topic, and this is for two good reasons. One good reason there is that we have to have a good advice, and we have to have the regulation here. So if you want to claim something, and I want to give an example, if we want to, for myocardial infarction, for instance, if we want to rule in a patient within 1 hour after admission, this is clearly something where we have to set up the clinical trial in the best way and also work with centers of competence together. And this might be, speaking globally now, and I would say that this is now the scope I can only represent here, but this can be that there's center of competences in France. It can be, like in this case, be in Switzerland or Germany. And there is another reason which I think is very valid for this one, because we are acting as a global company in this case. So there are other regulations. You mentioned the FDA. And to some extent, we are searching for also different people to be included in the clinical study, which are related to different, to gender aspects or to any other topics. So to give an example here, at some point we searched for a 60-year-old Hispanic person in order to get him included in the study. If we won't do this with proper preparation, then it is clearly something which would prolong the lead time for the innovation. That is one piece, and maybe another topic which is also talking about Europe, and I listened to what has been discussed yesterday as well. We have also topics where we then, for Europe, get into a situation that when we have done the study, it might not get us to a situation that it's in the guideline. So it needs to get into a guideline, and as it was also mentioned yesterday very clearly, a guideline is not a directive. So, which means then we have to go to different countries and also see how we get it into the different guidelines. And here, clearly, this is a request also from a supplier standpoint that this type of investments, which it clearly is from a supplier perspective, really needs to get harmonized. And I couldn't agree more with the statement here. Investing into this one means you need to have a good understanding on the outcome. And there is lots of clinical, of course, risks in it, which, of course, is related to the patient outcome, which in the end is the best what we want to achieve. But there's also financial aspects in it.
Okay. And from your point of view, what is the best country in Europe to put an innovation?
Okay.
Do you have a name?
I can't say.
Okay, we come back on this. Lucille.
Lucille, if you're saying innovation in medical devices, you can't exclude digital aspects. You are considered in our field as one of the specialists. What are the barriers that exist for the innovation in these technologies that mix medical devices and digital devices? For me, there are three barriers, and I'll start in an introduction to say in this field, Germany is not ahead of France. Let's start with that. That's part of the answer then. And I think that France still has possibilities of being the leader in this field, even if there are some European exceptions. But in terms of digital health, there's a real European will, but nothing has been developed or announced yet. And I think that we could be a leader. So that's a message. Let's be brave in terms of digital health. Okay, we hear you. We'll try to accelerate. What are the barriers? The first concerns the valuation of the real data. The medical device that collects data that works for digital health has an extraordinary opportunity. It collects data over time, efficacy data, but also quality of life data. And we could imagine an ecosystem of data collection in real time, in real life, that would be an extremely rich source of information for us. But we have to be able to use this data to exploit it and not wait for all of the experimentation to finish after 5 years to consider that a device that is now obsolete could be worthy of coming to market. That's the first one. Second barrier. Digital has an organizational impact that's very important. We need a tool to measure the organizational impacts, and we need to be creative. And I hope to involve industrial companies upstream, because when we develop digital devices, when we develop numerical devices and interoperability platforms, I think that this can be appealing for the organizational aspects, and this means that we have to think about these types of devices and their connection. The third barrier is, since digital goes faster than we do, it's constantly progressing. We need to find a way to have a constant assessment. When you sell software, if you improve the software, in agile development, that's the term we use today, this means that each time we bring in if we bring an improvement, we have to go back through the validation phase. We'll never progress. So I think we need to be creative in terms of KPIs, in terms of the different parameters and intangible elements that remain, and to make it possible for these intangible elements that we've committed to allow the companies to innovate incrementally over time. So real life has an organizational impact over time. So if I have a question for you, if you go back to the past and examine it, would you want to do real life studies? Would that have been a solution for you and your company? That's what we do in Germany. I'm sorry, I don't only want to compliment you, but in Germany, the German nuclear medicine organization decided to do a real-life study managed by the university in a public-private sphere, and they're responsible for the study. It's not us, and we're very happy with that because it doesn't cost us anything, because it's less of a cash flow problem for us. And secondly, they've taken ownership of the technology, they've bought into it, and the German nuclear medicine organization is trying to set up practices to treat thyroid cancer. And I would like these types of societies to take this on elsewhere also. The teams were in front of Bielefeld, in front of 1,500 surgeons yesterday to show the first results that we had on treating varicose veins. We've dealt with very complicated cases, people who had already had several surgeries, and we showed exceptional results that will allow us to have the CE marking for our product. So we need to be extremely pragmatic. When I go see my investors, and based on this, we will make choices. Will I go develop in Germany, France, or the U.S. for the reimbursement I'm talking about?
And I'm saying this very transparently. The flat rate is too expensive. It's a tool that's too expensive. If we could go back to the discussions that we had, we talked with our partners about simplifications. And this is a simple example for the medical device. For non-curable serious illnesses, Now, the illness in question is not as serious as that. You might die if you have to be amputated. It's a chronic disease, not a serious disease. So as an entrepreneur, now the board of directors will be deciding, of course. I'm just here to listen to what they have to say. But I doubt strongly that there will be a registration in France. The market doesn't lend itself to that. So we're receiving calls every week, well, maybe not every week, but every month. How can you deal with my varicose veins? Because there's no medical intervention involved. So it's an incredible choice. Stéphane, you wanted to say something. Yes. I just wanted to come back to a point. In France, we've got a lot of talent for these cans of worms. So we're looking at early access to the market, but we're limiting it to cases. And we don't necessarily the financing. So there's Article 51 that's supposed to take into account the organizational effect of innovation. But it's a can of worms. It really is very complex. It requires an awful lot of effort to get into that process. And, we're not trusting what's happening in the field, experimentation. There are great experiments. We do tests, rotor tests, etc. But analyzing the results of these tests and being courageous enough to take a decision, we don't know how to do that. And once again, this is what we have to manage to do. We've got to be able to set up a protocol, a KHAS, possibly. When we talk about financing, you're not interested. So who is interested? When you give an HASA, it's not setting an objective. You're establishing the criteria from a medical point of view. But what about the economic criteria? Let's experiment out there in the field, in offices. There are different things that can be done, but it's better to go out into the field. And when we have a conclusion, either we reject the idea or we go ahead with it. Mrs. Anneau, would you like to say something about this? The companies in the room are thinking the same thing. The small companies are likely to leave because of the financing, and big companies are not going to go into it because of the problem of taking an idea into another country. What do you think? In your opinion, what's your point of view? Are we on the right track, or are we backpedaling? Well, two things. Really, I'm very, very sad about what I'm hearing, because the French healthcare system needs this kind of thing. It needs your excellence. Patients need your excellent talents. So that's something that's very clear for me. So it's also essential. Well, really, I feel terrible about this. Having said that, as you've said, I'm just one cog in the works. The Commission is just one cog in the works. And I'm not very good at this, but the question of money is not part of what my organization does. But if we want to improve the expected service, we've got to count things. Let's go back to the future and go and answer your question directly. For a company, what's important is to know where they're going. There's nothing worse than not knowing where you're going. So we had to work on what we were doing, the quality of life, so that we could provide the criteria. And my first concern was to look at the assessment principles. How do you go about the assessment? What do you assess? So the document's been out for a year. We've already updated it, in fact, and life quality is essential. Now we've got a lot of work ahead of us. It's already underway on the organizational impact. As things stand today, the members of the Commission don't have the criteria for objectivating this. And by definition, you can't put this in the study. So the two need to go together. But we're seeing things change. Now, the third thing, well, concerning artificial intelligence. Today, we have no medical device that has artificial intelligence. We've been hearing a lot about them. There is work underway, at the health authority for this. There are metrics as well to be taken into account. We have to assess something that's going to change all the time. So what we need to be able to do is be able to measure if there's a deviation, if there's a wrong decision made. And I'm thinking about diabetes, for example. We know that things are going to come along very quickly, and we need to, we have to prevent hypoglycemia, things like this. So these are the things that we have to make progress with. Anyway, what we can do in the authority, we will do. And when it comes back to artificial intelligence, I know that it's frightening. There will, we will always find people saying it was better before. So we always have to question the situation. Of course, there are ethical challenges, legal challenges, challenges relating to human resources. There will be jobs that change, training that changes. But we have to be involved in it. Otherwise, somebody else will do it instead of us. So we've got a little over 12 minutes left. I think, we need good sense. We need to work together, teamwork. If we can't work together, the time that it takes to do these things is going to be extended. There's something that surprised me when I read the text and I looked at the ministerial strategy letter. This is what they say. For medical devices, the action of the committee will be based on the principles established for the drug. And I know that all companies are unhappy about this unless something is not transposable. Now, in Kirsten, MedTech, when you compare drugs to medical devices, what do you think? What can you say to us from a more European point of view?
Well, in the first place, I would love to ask what are the commonalities. But
Thank you.
Typically, this is not how legislation works. So we have to work, of course, on the differences and also describe them clearly. So as also mentioned before, it is on the operation. So medical devices are not chemicals, and we are not in the situation that they work properly or they work in an area where we would need, of course, some operations and interventions in this one. So that is clearly said, and as such, there are clear differences. Even for some of the medical devices, clinical trials are not needed or not necessary. So in order to prove this, and there is also a lot of data which will come out of this. To give maybe one or two examples there. So we heard yesterday about the situation of malaria in Rwanda, just as one example. And we have already a lot of data at hand which could get us to a situation that we can detect and diagnose this disease and the malaria in advance. So there is nothing which we really need to do in addition in order to do more clinical studies and so on. So there is a lot of data available. We double the data each year. 80% are unstructured, everything we said yesterday. And in the medical device industry we have, or in the area, we have really a good perspective of using the data differently. And also in other places there is a topic of variability. So medical devices are not used in the same way all over the country, in France, in UK, in Germany, or wherever. So there are, for instance, from the UK also some examples. Having a stroke, after having a stroke, in order to get a brain image, it may take you 1 hour in one area, or it make you take 6 to 7 hours in another area. So these are clear differences, and I think speaking also on other aspects of clinical trials, and this is maybe more the funny example, there is not a good situation of having blind studies, so there is no placebo hip transplantation or something like this which somebody could do. But seriously, I think there are clear differences. We can definitely only make them visible, try to work on calling out the differences here. And from a medical device area, I think what we really request is that these differences are also clearly seen and also clearly observed and also reflected in those legislations.
Première vue, pas pour tout le monde. Stéphane, justement,
Mais je crois, enfin, il faut.
Yes, I think we have to, call a spade, basically. What if we talk about sea transport and air transport? It's all transport, but it's silly to compare what you can't compare. Now, so that's the difference between drugs and medical devices. As president of SNITM, what can you say that's also going to help us to access more quickly? It's the impact on the organization of health and the objective that we have. Yes, I was with our president about 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about a pressurized health care system that was almost about to explode. And I think many people believe this. Innovation in medical devices leads to savings, but also efficiency. It saves time. It saves time for professionals, for nurses, doctors, etc. Time cannot really be defined. We say we're going to save time, but nurses will always be used elsewhere. But that's, it means that there is actually more flexibility in the system. The system is not as much under stress, and this is something that we certainly need. So let's believe in innovation. Let's believe that it's going to have positive effects, even if we can't measure those effects. What's going to be great is, what would be great would be to be able to measure them, but we don't have the tools so far. So we now have 6 minutes. I'd like each of you to give me one action that, for you, would speed up our ability to provide these medical devices for our patients who need these medical devices. It's not just a question of making money. We'll start with you, Lucille. So we need to simplify. You've got a little bit more time. So apart from that, I'd like to come back to a notion that came up yesterday that seems to me to be very important, and that's positive regulation. I belong to a small to medium-sized company, but it belongs to a group. I sell my subsidiary in-house, not just outside of the company. And there are words that make people afraid. When I hear that people want to put in place regulation for digital health, I know that it's for citizen safety and security. I know that it's all about protecting data, and I'm delighted about all of that. The regulation, everything that we do in Europe in terms of security represents an opportunity rather than a threat or a constraint. Now, if we talk about regulating digital health, I understand the challenges, but shouldn't we be talking more about supporting, federating, controlling? Positive regulation shouldn't be something that is seen as a constraint, because otherwise there will be a disagreement, there will be an absence of visibility, there will be no more investments made in order to justify artificial intelligence. So positive regulation. Okay, David. I think we need to continue to trust in this. Through all of the organizations, we need to work together. We need to dare to write down what we want to do. We need to have the possibility, small companies, so 80% of innovation in France, that's what we represent. There are only 25 employees in our company. We need to have a simple process for accessing the market in France. And again, I would like to claim for temporary reimbursements for all innovations, whether we're talking about incremental or organizational innovations. It may be thrown out if it's not good, but we need to do something. When we carry out that study, if we can have a randomized study for a medical device, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. So trust and simplicity. Mrs. Anou. I don't think it's just a question of randomized trials. So if I were to suggest something, I'm not going to talk about acts, because there are lots of things that are going to happen to acts, but I recognize that the complexity is there. When I talk about acts, people say, yes, but there's this and there's that, and it's not comprehensible. So the process needs to be reviewed, not just the nomenclature. I think there's something that really shocks me, and that is, well, the medical devices can be on a list with criteria. And then companies can say yes or no, I'm in line with the criteria, and that's how they can sign up. In fact, there are nomenclatures that date back to the creation of the social security system. Optics, for example, it dates back to 1946. So we're looking at a long period of time. So when I think about the disability law, something that's very dear to me, that dates back to 2005, where we've got to be more careful, saying that we've got to be more careful about people's needs. When you look at the different devices needed for people who have a disability, and you look at the list, and there are materials that are often very noble, wood, leather, and we're in an age where there's silicon and carbon being used, or connected tissues. We can see that there's a problem. So modernity, that's your word. Well, we need to review on a regular basis the nomenclatures, the bills of materials. Okay, rapidity, modernity. Christine, we've got just a few minutes left.
Actually, I would propose two things, and one is more from a European standpoint. So just reference, and this is all about collaboration, so referencing a bit what the Food and Health Commissioner has done by ramping up a new program for sepsis, something like this. So if this is a type of awareness where I think all regulators, suppliers, and different companies also can work together in order to get this going. And then it would
On dit co-construction.
Co-building, we say in France. Co-building, we say in France.
Point is from a company perspective, I think we should combine the strategy also to have speed up startup companies to speed up the agility, and also to give financing to also these companies. I mean, this is something where the big companies can really bring access to global customers, and like it was said yesterday, we need to speed up. So there is something we can certainly do.
So our prime ministers will probably be able to help us with this, especially when it comes to relations between big and small companies. I think we need to be courageous. We need to be audacious. On the one hand, you've got the health system, and on the other side, you've got industry. We need to be able to experiment together. We need to have the audaciousness to decide together and to apply together. Thank you. I will end with the idea of accelerating what we're doing without co-building. We believe in 2022 and the health plan, like everybody else in the room, so trust us, and all companies will be ready to work with all of the stakeholders. We are health stakeholders. Thank you very much.
C'est la pause maintenant. Merci beaucoup. Juste une information pour celles et ceux qui ont des chargeurs de portable, de penser à les remettre. Merci.
Please take